Well, in MAPA, in the Nuclear Weapons Task Force, the anti-proliferation group, and in MAPA in general, we talk a lot about what we're afraid of, about proliferation, about the new generation of nuclear weapons, and how this may bring nuclear weapons, nuclear war much closer than ever before. But we don't spend hardly any time talking about the nuclear weapons themselves. We talk about the delivery vehicles, right? The submarines, the missiles, the bombers, and the new technology that's being developed that makes all these delivery vehicles more alarming. But we don't spend that much time talking about the nuclear weapons themselves or their production or related things, more on the Department of Energy side of the issue than on the Pentagon side. And so we're very pleased to have Frank von Hippel with us now, who's extremely experienced in the area of nuclear war fighting and nuclear weapons production and related phenomena. And it came to our attention recently that Frank and some other experts in the field were concerned that the U.S. government was on the already beginning, but on the precipice of much more significant funding, starting up plutonium reactor programs that had been discontinued in the U.S. I think it was in '94, and also starting up sort of, I think it's fair to say starting up, because while there is a program now, it's sputtering and it's hardly in existence. So I think it's fair to say starting up again plutonium atomic bomb production, because the heart of the atomic bomb is these plutonium spheres, or pits as they're called. And those of us concerned about nuclear proliferation are always frightened whenever anybody talks about starting up plutonium reactors again and plutonium bomb production, partly because that means that the world would soon be awash in fairly large amounts of plutonium, which is all bomb-grade material. It doesn't have to be enriched or anything. It's just bomb-grade material from the get-go. And so that makes us worry about more proliferation of nuclear weapons. So we're very happy to have Frank here to discuss these concerns with us, tell us what he and some of his colleagues are starting to do about it, and give us some ideas about what we in MAPA might do about it, should we choose to put that up in our priorities enough to get involved. Frank is currently a senior physics researcher and professor and a emeritus professor of public and international affairs at the Program of Science and Global Security at Princeton University. So there's much more I could say about Frank, but I think we'd rather hear from him what he has to say. So he's going to talk about 40 minutes. And I ask that unless somebody really finds, gets lost in the technology or something and really is not getting much out of it, I think that's a fair interruption for a clarifying question. But otherwise, I would ask people to hold their questions or their discussion until he finishes. He's going to talk for about 20 minutes about the plutonium reactors that are being restarted and what that's all about. And then he's going to talk for about 10 minutes about the restart, or the proposed restart of the plutonium pit production. And then he's going to talk about 10 minutes about some ideas about what's being done about it and what we might do about it. And then we'll have ample time for as much, I think, questions and discussion as we need. And then at the end of that discussion, Frank will give us just about a minute or two of what he and some colleagues and another peace action group are doing about the No First Use campaign. And then we'll conclude with Elaine Scarry outlining, we just want to use this opportunity to also highlight what is MAPPA's leading nuclear campaign right now, which is the No First Use campaign. So we thought we would end just by highlighting that a little bit, and Elaine can fill us in on that. And so that end thing should all total just take about 10 minutes. So I think we have more than enough time to address all of this in an hour and a half, and we'll see how it goes. So take it away, Frank.
Well, thank you, Richard, and it's great to meet this group. I think I assume you go back to the nuclear weapons freeze or beyond before, and like our Coalition for Peace Action in New Jersey, and it's great to see such a great turnout, and I do see friends from around the country, so it's not just Massachusetts. So I'm going to try to share my screen now.
Oh,
Is it frozen?
All right. And let me just, okay. So Richard asked me to give 2 talks for the price of 1. And I'm going to start with the first is going to be that the U.S. does not need to build 2 new plutonium-pit production facilities. And in fact, that the need for 1 has not even been established. And the second is that the U.S. should not be encouraging the commercial separation of plutonium again, which is the issue in which I came into the nuclear weapons policy area. So let's see. So first, what's a pit? This is a cross-section of a modern nuclear warhead, and the pit is the key part of the trigger, the fission trigger of a modern 2-stage thermonuclear bomb. I've got it's a shell inside a chemical explosive, which, when the warhead is triggered, would be imploded and become supercritical, and some neutrons would be injected, and you'd get a fission explosion, which would then trigger the fusion explosion. Now, the U.S. Has not built a pit since the end of the Cold War, basically. But the National Nuclear Security Administration, which is the weapons part of our misnamed Department of Energy, and the largest part of the DOE, proposes to build 2 pit production plants, one at Los Alamos, where all this started, with a capacity of 30 pits a year, and one at the Savannah River site in South Carolina, in an abandoned building there that needs another mission, 50 pits a year. But as I'll explain, there is no demonstrated need for new pits, and efforts to produce pits at the Los Alamos pilot plant have failed. So building two new facilities on the basis of that design is maybe not the most cost-effective thing to do. The pits in the U.S., since we stopped producing them in 1989, and the oldest ones were produced around 1980, the pits in U.S. operational warheads are 33 to 44 years old. But their plutonium is aging very slowly. And the studies that were done, that were completed in 2006, concluded that they'll be functional for at least 100 years, which is in some ways bad news. But NASA, the NNSA has promised to see how much longer than 100 years they will last. And I just show here that some work did continue to go on, although a full program didn't continue. And at Livermore, they concluded that from their perspective, the minimum is at least 150 years. So actually, there's no established need to replace the existing pits. So not the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, is focused on producing pits for new warheads, which will replace the current warheads. And the advantage of the new warheads would be that they would be safer, they would be less susceptible to a plutonium dispersal accident. Those accidents have occurred in the past when airplanes crashed, bombers crashed with nuclear weapons. Some caught fire on runways. But they've never happened to actually ballistic missile warhead, and it's the aircraft, the bombs and the cruise missile warheads already have these safety features that NNSA now would like to extend to all the ballistic missile warheads. So one of the 4 warhead types based on U.S. ballistic missiles already has these features. NNSA wants to replace the other 3. And to start with, it wants to replace, there are 2 types of warhead on the intercontinental ballistic missiles. And there are 2 on the submarine launched ballistic missiles. So on the intercontinental ballistic missiles, there are W-87s, which have the modern safety features, but also 200 of W-78s, which don't. And so NNSA would like to start by producing a version of the W-87 to replace the W-78s. But we already have 340 W-87s beyond those that are deployed. And so the rationale actually for producing more W-87s is not just to replace the W-78s that are on the ICBMs, but it is to have more of these warheads available in case we decide to go back to the Cold War loading of our Minuteman missiles with 3 warheads instead of 1. But we don't need more warheads, irrespective of what other countries have, and we have as many as Russia and all the other countries have less. The second, so let me turn to the second set of warheads that NNSA would like to produce pits for. It says that NNSA is not been open about this second type of warhead. It calls the W-93, but it says it would use a pit tested with insensitive high explosive. But there's, as far as I can tell, there's only one such warhead that hasn't been deployed. And it used a pit that we have thousands already available of from dismantled Cold War weapons. So NNSA, I think the burden on NNSA is to prove that we need new pits. From my perspective, the argument is very weak. Now, it would be doubly unwise to simultaneously try to build 2 pit production facilities of an untested design. Los Alamos has been struggling and failing for more than a decade to produce more than a few pits at its pilot plant. And the pilot plant has been shut down since 2012 because of safety problems. There's no reason, therefore, to believe that the plant design that Los Alamos, which is where our pit expertise is headquartered, that the facility that they're building at Los Alamos will start up in 2026 and will not require additional billions for modifications. So, just purely from if we needed any pit production, it would be folly to build 2 plants of a design that may well not work. So so in terms of what activists can do, and I'm grateful to Richard for asking me that question. I think that the best thing we could do is call for a hearing on this situation, either before the House or Senate Armed Services Committees, the Strategic Force Committee subcommittees, or the appropriations committees that appropriate the money for the Department of Energy. Massachusetts is very well endowed with people to lobby on this. Senator Warren is on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Seth Moulton is on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. And Catherine Clark is on the House Appropriations Committee, not on the Energy and Water Development Subcommittee, however. So if you want to know more on this topic, I did publish about a year ago an article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and titled "Why a Decision on a Second U.S. Plutonium Pit Production Facility Should Be Delayed." And I'll leave the rest for the Q&A period. Now turning to the issue of plutonium separation. This graph shows the estimated amount of separated plutonium that we have in the world. And you can see, and I also show, assuming 3 kilograms of plutonium per pit, how much of this plutonium is in warheads worldwide, not just the U.S. About 94% of the plutonium is Russian in the U.S. You can see that our combined stockpiles peaked at 65,000 warheads, and we had enough plutonium for that. We're down to about 10,000 warheads now, so we have a lot of excess plutonium and weapons plutonium, and that's actually in those excess pits, which in our country are most of it is in the excess pits, which in our country they're stored at the Pantex nuclear warhead disassembly facility in Amarillo, Texas. But and you can see that with the end of the Cold War, the big buildup of plutonium slowed, although other countries have been continuing to build up. India, Israel, Pakistan in particular. But then there's this other, the yellow plutonium, the civilian plutonium, and that's what I'm going to talk about, which has continued, the stockpile has continued to grow. And you can see, and that civilian plutonium, even though it was separated to fuel reactors, is weapons usable. So it represents a great threat. And since it's not as secure as the weapons plutonium, in terms of nuclear terrorism, for example, it's a bigger threat. Now, let me just go back to fundamentals here. This is natural uranium, which is made up of two isotopes: uranium-235, which is just 0.7% of natural uranium, and is chain reacting. And if it's separated and enriched to more than 20%, or to weapons grade, which is called weapons grade more than 90%, it can be used to make a nuclear bomb. And in fact, we did use about 80% enriched uranium in the Hiroshima bomb. The bulk of uranium, however, is uranium-238, which does not chain react, but it can be turned into chain reacting plutonium in a reactor. And that's, of course, what I'm talking about. This is how plutonium is made in a reactor. You have a chain in a reactor. You have a chain reaction. One of our standard power reactors. You have a chain reaction where one U-235 fission releases a bunch of neutrons, and if you keep it at a constant power, each U-235 on average fission causes another fission by one of the neutrons it is produced. There are extra neutrons though, and in power reactors, most of the fuel is low enriched fuel, in about typically 4% or so to U-235 today. So most of the neutrons that aren't sustaining the chain reaction are captured by U-238, which turns it into U-239. And then one of the neutrons in that U-239 gets turned into a proton, which means that we're in a different element, neptunium. And then a neutron turns into a proton, and we have another element, which is plutonium. And the plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years, so we can use it for bombs, mostly, or also possibly fuel as well. Now, just the bomb use, just to give you a sense of what happened in a microsecond over Nagasaki. Now, the Nagasaki bomb was made with plutonium. Here you use basically all of the neutrons to have an exponentially growing fission chain reaction. And here I show the first step. You start the first plutonium nucleus splitting. It produces two neutrons, which cause fissions, and then you can keep doubling. And after 80 doublings, you get to the number of atoms, a number of nuclei in a kilogram of plutonium. And that all happens in a millionth of a second. And it was a kilogram of plutonium that fissioned over Nagasaki. The energy it released, though, was equivalent to 20 million kilograms, or 20,000 tons of TNT. So not all the plutonium in the pit fissioned, only 1 kilogram out of 6. So back to a reactor, if you have 4% U-235 in low enriched uranium fuel, when you go in, when you come out, you have about 1%. And about 1% of the U-238 has been turned into plutonium. And the rest of the U-235 has been fissioned mostly. And so you have and some of the plutonium that's been produced has been fissioned as well. So you have about 4% fission products. Well, if the plutonium is in the fuel, it's mixed up with these extremely radioactive fission products, and it's pretty safe from misuse. But the question is, why did people just want to separate this plutonium for civilian purposes? Well, the nuclear pioneers thought that nuclear power would not be economic if we depended just on the U-235. And therefore, they didn't think that uranium was abundant enough in rich enough ore. So they invented plutonium breeder reactors, reactors which would be fueled by plutonium made out of U-238, and which would at the same time be turning as much or maybe a little more U-238 into plutonium as they were consuming. And in this way, you could in theory fission all of the uranium and get 140 times as much energy out of natural uranium than if you just used a U-235 chain reaction. And it was an amazing concept, and really, I think, still enthralls the nuclear engineering community, because on average, the Earth's crust contains 3 grams of uranium in an average ton. And if you could fission all those 3 grams, you would release as much energy as you would release by burning 10 tons of coal. So you basically, a breeder reactor would turn the Earth's crust into super coal for breeder reactors. And they called it burning the rocks. And basically, so the way a breeder works here, it's the same diagram I showed, except with a plutonium chain reaction and making 1 plutonium for every plutonium fission. Now fast neutron fissions with fast neutrons create more secondary neutrons. And that's actually essential to make the breeding possible. But the water in ordinary reactors slows down neutrons because the neutrons hit the nuclei of the hydrogen, which are just about the same mass, and it's like billiard balls. A collision like that can just stop the neutron. And so, in order to make these breeder reactors work, they had to find a heavier nucleus, a material with a heavier nucleus to cool the reactor, so that the neutrons would just bounce off these heavier nuclei without losing much energy. And what they came up with was liquid sodium, which has a low boiling point, a low melting point, about 100 degrees centigrade, about the boiling water temperature. Well, this is what, when I came in, the Atomic Energy Commission was talking about in terms of the future of nuclear power in the United States. We were going to, by now, we were going to have more than 3,000 nuclear power reactors, and most of them were going to be breeder reactors. Well, it didn't turn out that way. Partly because our consumption of electricity slowed, the growth of our consumption of electricity slowed down. And if this future had actually occurred, we would be producing from nuclear power alone 6 times as much electricity as we consume. But the other part was that nuclear power didn't take over. Today, it provides about 20% of our electric power. And we've been on a plateau for a long time. And to the extent that we've had growth, it's been other sources, especially lately renewable energy, wind and photovoltaics. So we didn't run out of cheap uranium. There was more uranium found, and we weren't using it as fast. And as a result, and reactors started getting more expensive rather than going down the learning curve as we built more. They got more expensive, and so the cost of uranium today contributes only 1/4 cent per kilowatt hour, per nuclear kilowatt hour. And whereas the Energy Information Administration, if we built, well, we are actually building a couple of nuclear reactors. It estimates that the power from them would be 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So we don't have a uranium problem, and so we don't need these breeder reactors. And breeder reactors turned out to be pretty expensive sources of electricity. And one reason is that sodium burns in air and water, and leaks happen. And you have to go in to change the fuel. You have to go in to repair. And so there've been lots of sodium fires, and the average capacity factor, that is of sodium-cooled reactors, has been about 20%. The capacity factor is how much electricity a reactor produces in a year compared to how much it would produce if the reactor operated at full power all year. Well, the water-cooled reactors operate on an average of about 80%. So they produce for a given investment about 4 times as much electric power as a breeder reactor would, operating at 20%. And so no commercial breeder reactors have been built. There are a couple of prototypes operating in Russia. China's building a couple of prototypes for suspect reasons, and India is the same. And I'll get to that. So, actually Admiral Rickover tried a sodium-cooled reactor in his second submarine, and he concluded that way back in 1957 that sodium-cooled reactors are expensive to build, complex to operate, susceptible to prolonged shutdown as a result of even minor malfunctions, and difficult and time-consuming to repair. And he was right. Well, what we did, so but globally, I mean, it wasn't just the US which was enthusiastic about breeder reactors. Several other countries were as well. And collectively, we spent about $100 billion on breeders. And this is what we got. One of the countries that our U.S. Atomic Energy Commission promoted breeder reactors to was India. And we and the Canadians provided them with a reactor to produce plutonium, and then we provided them the technology to separate the plutonium. And one of the first things they did with the plutonium was to test a nuclear weapon. They said it was a peaceful nuclear weapon, so a peaceful nuclear explosive, so that they didn't violate their understanding with us that this program was for peaceful purposes. But in fact, their nuclear weapons program grew out of this from this first test. So the Ford administration looked around and discovered other countries were going down the same road. All these other countries at the time had military juntas running their governments. Brazil had contracted with Germany for reprocessing technology, Pakistan with France, South Korea with France, and Taiwan with Germany. Well, the Ford Foundation, the Ford administration put a lot of pressure on Germany and France, and this technology was not delivered. And it also organized what's called the Nuclear Suppliers Group to shut down the export of reprocessing and uranium enrichment technology. Then I was involved with the Carter administration review of whether we need, what about our breeder reactor program? Did we need breeder reactors? And we concluded that breeder reactors and reprocessing would be neither necessary nor economic, and history has borne us out. Congress pushed back for a while, but in 1983, after the US demonstration breeder reactor cost had increased 5 times, they canceled it. And the US nuclear utilities decided not to pay for reprocessing with no demand for plutonium. And they agreed to pay the Department of Energy a 1/10 of a cent a kilowatt hour to build a deep underground spent fuel repository. Now, that spent fuel repository got hung up because of opposition from Nevada, which Congress chose to be the site of the repository. And so the Department of Energy is now paying about a 1/20th of a cent per kilowatt hour for on-site dry cask storage while we try to figure out where to site a repository. Now, the lovers of sodium-cooled reactors came back and they said, well, maybe they won't produce economic power, but we've got something else we can do with them. We can solve the radioactive waste problem, since you've got problems there. We can turn it from a million-year problem into a 300-year problem. All we have to do is take out the plutonium and fission it. We'll turn these breeder reactors into burner reactors, and we'll fission the plutonium and the other long-lived so-called transuranic elements. And they showed this graph, which shows that the fission products go away after about 300 years, whereas if you didn't fission the plutonium and other transuranic isotopes, it would go away the radioactivity would go away a lot more slowly. But I mean, this is an accurate representation of the hazard if the danger was that somebody would dig down 500 meters and eat spent fuel. But we live on the surface, and we're really worried about the people living above. Radioactivity leaking out of the repository and getting into our water and food. And here, when you do a less simplistic analysis, sorry for this graph, and look at the solubility of the different radioisotopes in spent fuel, and how they operate in the food chain, you find plutonium becomes relatively unimportant because it is relatively insoluble and it has low absorption by plant roots and by the human gut. And you see other isotopes, and in the long term, it's actually a fission product that is one of the dominant isotopes, iodine-129, which didn't go away in the promised 300 years because it has a half-life of 17 million years. And then also to put the whole thing into perspective, and in my hierarchy of concerns, radioactive waste in a deep repository is pretty low compared to the nuclear weapon proliferation problem that we're talking about. You see that radium, which actually is a decay product of U-238 and produces the radon that we know about in our basements, radium becomes one of the dominant sources of radiation doses to in this case, a subsistence farmer living above the repository. And radium and the radium that U-238 that the radium comes from was actually underground in the first place. It came from a uranium mine. Okay, so now what's the situation with regard to reprocessing today? It continues in 5 countries. Russia is still working on breeder reactors and has accumulated 100 tons of separated civilian plutonium and excess weapons plutonium, and has just begun after more than 40 years of civilian plutonium separation to use plutonium in its prototype breeder reactor. But it has Rosatom, Russia's nuclear combine, has said that this prototype is not competitive with its water-cooled reactors, and it's not going to build another one anytime soon. France and Japan gave up on their breeder programs, but by that time reprocessing was so embedded in their economies that and their thinking that they insisted that the utilities continue to pay for reprocessing and recycle the plutonium into their fuel, of their water-cooled reactors. The resulting fuel, so-called mixed oxide fuel, costs 10 times as much as the low enriched uranium fuel that it replaces. It only replaces about 10% of it. But France and Japan, as a result of these programs, have accumulated a lot of plutonium themselves. Japan is the only non-weapon state that reprocesses, that separates plutonium, but South Korea has been saying, to the U.S. for decades now, You let Japan reprocess. Why are you pressing us not to reprocess? So it's a problem. And then there's India and China, which are both building prototype breeder reactors, but it looks like these reactors are not just for electricity production. They also would be copious sources of weapons-grade plutonium and both India and China are pushing up against the limits of their weapons plutonium, and so the breeder programs are really not civilian in that sense. So I'm almost at the end here. Well, I'm to the action items. So DOE under the Trump administration began encouraging both the construction of sodium-cooled reactors by cost sharing with companies and reprocessing. And the Biden administration hasn't stopped this yet, and has a few other things to worry about. So the DOE plans to build what's called a versatile test reactor, sodium-cooled test reactor at the Idaho National Laboratory, which is historically the center of our breeder reactor R&D. It proposes to co-fund with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett a sodium-cooled reactor in Wyoming. They're not called breeders anymore. It's hosting the construction at the Idaho National Laboratory of a microreactor, which also a fast neutron reactor. And Idaho National Laboratory has provided a design for the fuel of these fast neutron reactors, which has to be reprocessed because it contains liquid sodium as a conductor from the metal fuel meat to the cladding. So, and you can't put sodium containing spent fuel underground because there's water there. And DOE is therefore transferring to the two startups in the US and Canada the reprocessing technology that's been developed by Idaho National Laboratory for this type of fuel. The startups claim falsely that the technology is proliferation resistant. That's something that was claimed by Vice President Cheney, and at the end of the Bush administration, there was a 6-lab review which concluded that it isn't proliferation resistant. So this is the situation we're in now, and this is why I'm talking to activists. So I think this craziness can be stopped again. It makes no sense economically. It's happening only because the DOE is cost sharing on these sodium-cooled reactors, and it's funding the R&D. It's funding most of their costs, right, as R&D. It has not yet received high-level review by the Biden administration, although a group of us have written to the Biden administration asking for that. But to increase the visibility of this issue, I think non-proliferation activists among you could join in demanding a hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House or the House Foreign Affairs Committee on the proliferation and nuclear terrorism implications of what the Department of Energy is doing. And here again, you're fortunately situated. You've got Senator Markey, who's I think the most passionate on this issue of any senator or representative, and he's on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and Foreign Relations Committee, and Bill Keating is on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I think this is it. I've just got some, if somebody can post this on your website, I can send it to you. And it contains some references three of us wrote a book about this. I wrote recently an article, Bill Gates' Bad Bet on plutonium-fueled reactors from the Board of Atomic Scientists. A group of us have written a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau asking that the Canadian government look at the proliferation implications of the support of its Ministry of Natural Resources for a company that wants to reprocess. And then I have a blog item recently I just put up this a week ago on the website of the International Panel on Fissile Materials. So that's it. I guess let me stop sharing, and I think I don't think I ran over too much.
Okay, thank you so much, Frank. It's probably a little more technical than we're used to hearing in our nuclear weapons Zooms, but hopefully we were all able to follow it enough that we get the idea that we're faced with a rather serious nuclear proliferation problem. As the Indian case demonstrated, having a world awash with untold tons of bomb-grade plutonium is not where we want to be. And I was stunned looking at the graph showing all of the plutonium that's already sitting around all over the place. And now just, well, this is not Frank talking, this is me talking. It appears to me that the only reason this is happening is because people at the Idaho National Lab and others in the nuclear weapons and nuclear generating station industries have some vested interests, have some previous investments, have their own unique expertise and facilities, and they don't want to let go of this dream of plutonium reactors and so on. So basically, this is just being driven by these people who have a certain professional and economic self-interest, and it actually has nothing to do with by any measure, any reasonable economic or even military arguments in terms of the augmentation now of the atomic bomb production, the pit production, because we already have all the pits that we need in storage that are just the right ones for the new generation of nuclear weapons. So we don't even need to produce any more. So that's the way it looks to me about what's really driving this. And unfortunately, there's so few people in the country that know or understand or have had any opportunity to educate themselves about these dangers, that it's worthy of our consideration in MAPA to consider adding this to our already extensive list of nuclear weapons activities that we're engaged in, and take Frank up on his suggestions of some things that we can do about it. Anyway, so the floor is open for either questions or discussion. So how are we, how are people supposed to signal their interest?
People can either use the reactions button at the bottom of their screen to click on raise hand, which will raise their virtual hand. Peter Metz has already raised his virtual hand. Or else you can just type your question into the chat.
I'm not experienced at moderating these discussions. I don't even know how to find a hand that's been raised. So
Well,
Perhaps I need to pass this responsibility.
Well, why don't I call on the first person? But Richard, just open your participants window, and you're going to see the little hand. So Peter is the first person with his hand raised. So let's call on him first while you're working on that. And Peter, you should start your video and unmute.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, here I am, and somebody took my. Oh, okay, fine. First off, Frank, thank you just profusely for taking an incredible amount of information and packing it into, I don't know, what did it take you, 45 minutes? I need about a year and a half to absorb it all. Yeah, and I'm an engineer. But one of the things that struck me, and there's a lot, I think I saw in your graphs that there's material for 60,000 nuclear weapons, plutonium sufficient for 60,000 nuclear weapons left over from the bombs that we've disassembled. If that's, I was given to understand that our efforts to eliminate the nuclear weapons that have been so monstrously successful over, having reduced nuclear weapons from over 60,000 to less than 15,000 today, that material had been disposed of properly, that some of it had been consumed in nuclear reactors and things like that. No, not wrong.
Yeah, no, I think it's understandable. That was the intention. And in fact, I was in the White House and responsible for that program in 1994. But it stalled. Basically what happened was we agreed with Russia to get each of us to get rid of 34 tons of plutonium, and it was going to be used as mostly as fuel. Both are, we were going to pay for the Russian program, and both programs got much more expensive, and Congress refused to increase the amount of money for Russia's program, and then it ran out of patience with our program too, and so they both were canceled. Our current plan is to just dilute the plutonium and bury it in a underground repository in a salt bed in New Mexico. But that's going to happen very slowly, about 1.5 tons a year when it gets going, and it won't get going for several years at that. And in the case of Russia, they got out of the after we sanctioned them over their seizure of Crimea and invasion of eastern Ukraine. President Putin said, and you guys aren't doing what we agreed. You, the Americans, aren't using the plutonium as you agreed that you were going to use it in reactor fuel. We're out of here. So their program isn't going forward either. So it's a disposal challenge. I mean, the Russians think this is very valuable material and consider it a sacrilege to bury it without using it as a fuel. So that was that was part of their reason for getting out of the deal when we decided to just bury it.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, Frank Baldwin.
Frank Baldwin, okay.
Frank,
Hi.
are you
Yes, I'm
with
here.
us, Frank?
Yes, why didn't we use the plutonium for energy?
Well, that was the original plan. That was to make it into this mixed oxide fuel, such as what the French are using, and that is mixing it with U-238 and making the equivalent of low enriched uranium fuel for our current reactors. But the cost, this is partly a Department of Energy problem. I mean, they can't build anything without it getting 5 times as costly and taking twice or more the length of time, and it ultimately got so expensive that the Congress shut that program down.
The reason why a lot of us here, I'm sure, signed on to this meeting was not to learn how to build a nuclear weapon, but rather to find out what we should tell Elizabeth Warren to do. You said to set up a committee to study it. Well, exactly what do you propose they would do?
Well, I had 2 proposals. I mean, I have ideas about other things as well, but the proposals I brought to you, one related to the plutonium-pit production, which is unrelated to this reprocessing problem that I addressed in the bulk of my talk. And basically, what I've been doing for the last almost 50 years is fighting against plutonium separation. And we won that fight in the Carter and early Reagan administration, as far as the US is concerned. And now under the Trump administration, it came back to life. It doesn't make any more sense now, makes even less sense now than it did during in the 70s.
Has it been started again?
Well, it's in an R&D stage. It's being promoted by the Department of Energy. It's not actually happening, but it's being promoted as part of the Department of Energy's agenda of advanced nuclear reactors.
What do they want to do exactly?
Okay, let's let someone else have a turn. We're going to go to Gordon Edwards next.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much, Frank, for a very good talk. I wanted to ask one point of clarification and also make a comment, maybe the comment first. I think that one of the problems with using plutonium as a fuel, plutonium once produced is basically indestructible except by burning it in a reactor, and then it's not complete. The problem with doing that on a commercial basis is that you make the plutonium an article of commerce, and that's makes it much easier to fall into the hands of criminals and terrorists. Right. And consequently, even though a very small fraction of the plutonium would likely fall into criminals, that's all you need. You know, you could wake up and find Washington, D.C. gone and not even know who did it. So that's one of the big problems with using plutonium as a commercial fuel. The question I had, Frank, had to do with the fast reactors. You said that the breeder reactors are sodium cooled, and most of them are, in fact, but they could also be molten salt, couldn't they? And also gas cooled. You could have fast reactors that had different types of coolant rather than just sodium. Is that right?
That's right, and that's in fact the problem you're dealing with in Canada, where there's a company that's promoting a molten salt reactor, and with the same fuel cycle, basically, wants to start those reactors up with plutonium from Canada's spent fuel, and then recycle that plutonium. So it's Canada has been infected. Somehow the virus got across the border. Although the virus, actually, your virus came from the UK, not from the US, I think.
That's right. Well, we're very grateful to you and to your colleagues for intervening and sounding the alarm bell here in Canada, because a lot of us are really asleep at the switch. So thanks very much for that. And thanks for clarifying about the types of fast reactors.
Thank you, Gordon.
Is there anyone else that?
So Tom Clements is on just a voice line, so I will read his comment. He says, thanks for this important event on June 29th, Savannah River Site Watch in Columbia, South Carolina. Nuclear Watch New Mexico in Santa Fe, and Tri-Valley Cares in Livermore, California, brought a NEPA lawsuit in federal court against DOE NEPA concerning the proposal for 2 plutonium pit sites. See details on pit website of South Carolina Environmental Law Project, which is representing us, and he gives a link. Would you want to comment on that, Frank?
You know, that's another way to challenge the pit production program, and it's a very impressive group of organizations that have taken that on. I've been working with them, and it's a way to slow down the progress, and these groups have actually derailed U.S. pit production plants before. But I think it's important also to educate Congress where a lot of the pressure for these, I mean, which has basically been stampeded into thinking somehow we would, our pits might turn into green cheese. And where would we be without the ability to make more of them?
Yeah, right. Okay,
I have a question. As I understand it, and I may well be wrong, the 3 experimental breeder reactors that you mentioned are in R&D phase right now. But that R&D is budgeted R&D, and it's money that's already being spent. I mean, it's peanuts, but it's even though they're not actually building these reactors yet, the pipeline is already on its way. The money's already started flowing, and if we don't do something to slow it down or stop it, when would we expect the funding to actually build these plutonium reactors?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, the money that's going into this program at the moment is pretty small. It's running hundreds of millions of dollars, and it would have to ramp up much higher into more than $1 billion. And so it is R&D planning and so on. And I think that there is some pushback on these plans. I understand that haven't checked it myself, but that the Biden administration didn't actually ask for more money for this so-called versatile test reactor that Idaho wants to build. Idaho National Laboratory wants to build. So I think eventually the sheer weight of bad economics will prevent this program from becoming anything substantial. My main concern is that in the meantime, the U.S. changing its policy on reprocessing would reinforce people in other countries who want to have a nuclear weapons option and say, well, you guys are doing it, I guess it's all right then, right? And you know, we've been pretty consistently opposing reprocessing everywhere in the world, and to start with, South Korea, you know, would say, you know, why are you guys still opposing us reprocessing? And it just so happens that more than half of the South Korean public wants to have a nuclear weapons option for, you know, to deal with North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So we got Gail Wiley, and maybe this is one of the last questions we should go over to Elaine pretty soon after we hear from Gail. Gail, can you unmute? Gail, are you hearing me? Gail Wiley? Can you unmute, please? She's talking, but we're not hearing.
You're muted.
Maybe I got to push the button and tell you to unmute. There. Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry
Okay.
about that. Sorry, my bad. My bad, Gail. Okay.
Okay, I guess the problem I'm seeing is this communication of all this complexity to these lovely people who run for Liberal or Tory in Canada, and they haven't got a friggin' clue. And they'd also, I doubt, would even think they could learn enough, and they don't know what's going on. I think Dorothy's on here. Her group goes to visit MPs who are already in place. And it's the first time they've heard of it, and they're the party that is promoting this stuff. I'm wondering if you have some magic bullet for communicating to your average person who might run for MP or even provincially for an MLA, or do you think it'd be better to concentrate on the kind of things you're talking about in the US, like wait until they're like demand a parliamentary committee, and there you could have multi-day training or explanation and a chance to question? Would that work better? Or do you think it's possible to educate ordinary people enough so they would know to be scared of it and talk against it even when their party is promoting it?
Well, the boiled down version of it is plutonium is bad. It's a nuclear weapons material, and we shouldn't be separating it. That's sort of, you can boil the message down. But I think a group of us did write. So you're Canadian, is that right? Yeah. A group of us did write to Trudeau, and we heard back that it had been passed to the foreign minister, Garneau, I think, Garneau or something, and to the person who started all the trouble, Seamus
Reagan.
O'Regan, yeah, who's the Minister of Natural Resources, and so I don't know what, but I do think that if it was possible to get a hearing, public hearing, and just not leave them to work it out in private, I think it would be very helpful.
Okay, public hearing. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I wanted to follow up on my previous question briefly. I think it's the reason why we should take this up and spend a little bit of energy on it is precisely because this is not like virtually all the other battles that we're fighting, because plutonium, this whole thing about plutonium has been a failure for 50 or 60 years. Everybody who's tried it has given up on it. It's like, it's no secret that economically it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So we have that going for us. And so, whereas other issues, we don't get anywhere unless we get really substantial public knowledge and mobilization. But with this issue, it might not take all of that, because it's already such a fraught issue that our little pitchfork of hay in the wind might actually matter, because it may not take that much to stop this from really taking off.
I think you're right. And by the way, your summary was a good one, I thought, of the issues. I think just raising the visibility of the issue, the forces pushing it are not that powerful, and the people who are concerned about proliferation, I think, can exert comparable weight or more or even greater weight if they get activated.
Why don't you give us 60 or 90 seconds of your views and involvement in the no first use issue, and then we'll turn it over to Elaine. The reason, again, we're doing this is it's a different, obviously extremely related topic, but a different topic. But it's our major NAPA campaign right now. So we want to take this opportunity to plug it a little bit. So go ahead, Frank, and you say a little bit about your view on the No First Use campaign.
Well, it's a no first. It's a priority for our chapter of peace action, the Coalition for Peace Action.
That's New York, New Jersey, or what?
It's southern New Jersey and the Philadelphia region.
Uh-huh.
Middle and southern, but it's based in It happens to be based in Princeton, the headquarters in Princeton. But it's also I just take the opportunity to mention that a group of us decided we had to try to mobilize more physicists to get involved in this. And so we started something we call the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. And we actually got money from the American Physical Society, the Professional Society of American Physicists. We've been giving talks. We gave 60 talks at universities, a couple of national labs this past year, and we have 500 members now. And our first issue in the Biden administration has been no first use, the one we've been campaigning on. And,
oh, right.
And tomorrow, actually, wearing my Coalition for Peace Action hat, I'll be part of a briefing on that to one of the Philadelphia Congress people.
Thank you. So Elaine, would you like to reframe the campaign and
Sure.
restate its basic rationale?
Yeah, I just see that Jonathan King has his hand raised. Should we let him speak first, Richard? Or
Sure, that's okay.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
To unmute. Just very quickly, Frank, the hearings, which we will run with, can any member of the committee hold a hearing, or does it have to be the chair of the full committee to set the hearing?
The chair of the subcommittee can do it.
Chair of the subcommittee can do it.
Yeah, but the individuals. I mean, you have to get a blessing from at least the chair of a subcommittee.
Thank you. All right. Well, we will tackle it through.
That's great. That's great. I'd like to stay in touch with your effort.
so, and thank you so much, Frank, for this amazing talk. We always have occasion to note that the nuclear architecture is vast and complex, and to take just this piece of it, the trigger, and see what all is involved, what all already exists, and what kind of energy is needed to make sure it doesn't get even more out of hand is very important, I think, to everyone here tonight. And there are many people here tonight. I think that the hearing makes a great deal of sense because your account of how preposterous it is, given how much already exists, is so lucid that once it is brought out into daylight in a hearing, it seems like it would have to stop. I think that the no first use is equally important, and it is, as Richard said, our main goal right now. It's the main goal or a central goal of many peace action groups. So just as Frank's peace action group is involved, so Maine Peace Action, Maryland Peace Action, Chicago Peace Action, New York Peace Action, Kansas City Peace Works, Code Pink, many other groups have designated first use as something that we will all collectively work for. Though it seems to be only a small part of the nuclear architecture, it is in its own way, and now metaphorically, a trigger point, because it's the place where the launch of the weapon can happen. And as we know from former missile launch officer Bruce Blair, that launch is half the length of a tweet. So the immensity of the injury and the immense scale of the nuclear architecture and the speed of the nuclear architecture, Thomas Countryman has said it's global warming at supersonic speed. All those things have as their counterpart the incredible reduction of agency on the firing end of the weapon. The fact that one person, literally one person, unmodified, unseconded, unratified by any other voice, can bring about the launch means that it should be dismantled. All our energy should go into dismantling. Even if that were the only step that were done, it would have a big effect if other countries did it. Russia and the United States, as most of you know, together own 93% of the warheads. If both of them take a position of no first use, it considerably reduces the possibility of suddenly going to war if an accident were to happen or a misconstrual were to happen. And we have the clear constitutional tools for legally addressing it. One thing that's interesting and important to realize is that international law, like the ban, tends to confront the nuclear peril and the nuclear immorality in terms of the scale of the injury that happens and the illegality of the injury. And national law gives us a different kind of traction because it addresses the question of the legitimacy of entering into war. And our Constitution says that you have to have congressional oversight. You cannot begin to injure a foreign population unless you and until you have a congressional declaration of war, something that has just been thrown out in the nuclear age, but is being brought back with several pieces of legislation now in Congress. So I'm sure that in future meetings, we'll be wanting to take specific action on the plutonium issue and to make sure that hearings are held. But for tonight, we wanted just to make sure everyone is aware of our focus on first use. And Cole Harrison has made available for us letters that we can go to and sign right now in chat. He will put the links in chat. One of the letters is to President Biden, asking him to bring about a policy of no first use. The other is to your senator or representative. And the moment you put in your zip code, it will automatically put in who your representatives are. And again, talks about the importance of bringing about a no first use policy, and reminds our representatives and our president of the scale of civilian voices now speaking out about this, and also the voices of former officers such as former Secretary of Defense Perry. Recently, former Secretary of Defense Kissinger has said, we're in a more dangerous situation now than we were even in the Cold War because of algorithms and internet and so forth. And the letter to President Biden also reminds him that as vice president, he spoke very eloquently against the first use policy, as he did again when he was campaigning for the presidency in the New Hampshire primary. So if you would go to the chat and sign into that letter, some of you may have already sent a letter. That's fine. If you want, you can add a sentence saying, I'm writing to you again because this is so important. But the fact that they would get a second letter from you should not deter you from doing it, because obviously they're not checking off all our names. They're just seeing how many of us are willing to come forward. The former head of Strategic Air Command, General Lee Butler, who was in charge of the nuclear triad for a number of years, has said that the moral obligation of every resident of this country, every citizen and every resident of this country, is to come forward and speak about this. And that in the end, our moral stature as a species is going to be judged by our ability to do this. So if you can do it tonight, or if you can't do it tonight, if you can make a phone call to Congress tomorrow and talk to the office of your representative and ask for that, And again, in future days, we'll certainly want to address the issue that we've heard about so eloquently tonight. Cole, do you want to add anything, or
I think you
Jonathan?
said it. I think you said it, Elaine.
Okay.
I put the link in the chat, and if people want to click on that, they can send off those messages right now.
Great.
Right. Cole, do you have any idea how many people were joining us this evening?
I was around 70, 75. I think
Okay.
we're down to 59 at the moment.
I do
Very
think
good.
really everybody on this call is going to be, part of this team, part of this campaign. We're going to assume you're all supportive of Frank's proposal that we press for a hearing. It's an easy thing to send around the country to our other affiliates, people who recognize the value of it. And so I think this has been really extremely valuable, and also one of the rare cases where we can really move from the information, which is so clear and so compelling, into political action that, as Richard points out, may actually be effective. So it's exciting. Forward together, as they say in the Poor People's Campaign.
All right. Well, I guess this concludes our evening together here. Thank you very much, Frank. And I guess we'll be cooperating on these issues in the future. Excellent. Okay.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.